Hey y'all. I'm sorry about yesterday not posting. Anyway, I'm going to post today, hopefully 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. We'll see. But for 7 and 8, we're going to do chapters 7 and 8 today. I want you to remember a little bit about yesterday, day before yesterday. Remember that was when Moon was leaving with Mr. Gene, which was from the boys' home. And he was going to be sent to the boys' home. Moon was terrified. So Moon escaped from Mr. Gene. Remember, he got sick in the car and then hit Mr. Gene in between the legs and he ran. So that's where we are. We are at the point where he is running in the forest. So let's get started on chapters 7 through 8. Hang on. I've got a new device I'm trying to read on. Okay. I made it back to the shelter that evening. The dark hole that had seemed so terrible the night before now made me feel safe again. I figured the outside world was just what Pap had warned me about. Everybody was out to get us, and hiding in the forest was the only way to stay safe. Loneliness was something I'd have to wait on to pass, like Pap said it would. I sat on the hide pile and put on my jacket and hat to warm up. Then I pulled some dried venison off a hindquarter that hung from the ceiling and chewed it slowly while I listened to the forest sounds. Venison is like deer meat. So, and then he says hindquarter, that's like its leg, almost from its butt all the way down to its, probably about that part of his leg. And I've never explained this before, but they've said this a lot. They say hide pile and they say selling hides. Hide is the animal's fur, the animal's skin and fur. Okay. So he's laying down, he's eating that venison meat, which is the deer meat, and he's laying down on his hide pile, kind of like his bed. I figured I could spend at least one more night before the law could get with the surveyors and track me to the shelter. It was too far and too dangerous to try it after dark, so they wouldn't start out until morning. The closest paved road was 3 miles to a bird. With all the gullies and swamps, though, not even I could travel that distance, in that direction in less than half a day. So he's thinking in his mind how much time he's got before they'll come and get him. When I woke at daybreak, robins were scratching in the leaves and a blue jay complained from nearby. I laid still and listened to the forest for several minutes until I was sure that I heard nothing unusual. When I was satisfied that no one was outside, I slid off the hide pile, got my rifle from my place I'd kept it in the ceiling. I grabbed some bullets out of the paint can and poured them into a cheesecloth that I'd tied together. Then I quickly gathered other things I thought might be useful for the trip, and I packed them all in the wheelbarrow. My rifle, bullets, traps, several hides, dried coon meat, extra clothes, Pap's personal box, some rope, a cooking pot, and a hatchet. When I was done, I threw a rain tarp over everything and used some twine to secure it. Twine is kind of like rope to secure it. After one last look around, I stuck my deerskin hat on my head and set out for the river. I'd take a trail that was rarely used that went north to the high ridges of the Noxubee River and then cut west to the Blacktop. It was a longer route, but the river bottom was open and free of brush, so I could move more easily, push the wheelbarrow, and see anybody that might be around after me. Once I made it to the Blacktop, now guys, Blacktop means the road, the paved road. Like where I live, right down the road, they're getting it repaved, and they put this black tar over the top, so they call it a blacktop. So he's saying when he got to the road. Once I made it to the blacktop, I'd be at the bridge that crossed over the river. I'd have to push my wheelbarrow over the bridge and then get back into the trees again on the other side. I thought about what Pap said about only traveling at night, but I reasoned it was more important for me to get off Mr. Wellington's property as fast as I could. Between wrestling the wheelbarrow through the forest and resting, it took me close to 6 hours to get to the highway. Besides the river bottom, I had to get through 2 sloughs, a thick cedar grove, and a 1/4 mile of swampy cane thicket. Thicket means like where the woods are real thick, like there's a lot of briars, a lot of bushes. You got to think, he's pushing this wheelbarrow with all that stuff through all that. If you've ever pushed a wheelbarrow just in your yard, when you go over sand, think about how hard it is. Now he's having to go beside a river. Sometimes beside a river, the sand and stuff gets kind of thick and wet. Think about that. And then think about, then he's going up into the woods where it's thick, where it's got a lot of briars and bushes. It's hard for him. And he said it took him 6 hours. When I got to the blacktop, I stayed just inside the trees and I laid down to rest. I felt my legs throbbing and watched my stomach move up and down. A breeze chilled my forehead where the sweat clung to my bangs. I reached over and pulled some coon meat from beneath the tarp. I laid back and chewed it slowly. I wanted to close my eyes, but I knew there was no time to sleep. Then I heard a car whoosh by, and it reminded me to get on my way soon. I stood ready in the trees and listened and watched the road. When I thought it was safe, I pushed out and up onto the blacktop and started running behind the wheelbarrow. Now you got to picture this. He's on this straight road, right? But on the sides, there's these ditches, and that's where when he and Pop would hear a car coming, it was a straight road. They felt like they had enough time to whoop down and hide in the woods until that car passed, and then they would get back up on the blacktop or on the road. But remember, he said there's a bridge. Now think about that bridge for a minute. Can you just jump off the side of the bridge and go hide? No, right? Not unless you're just going to jump into whatever's under that bridge, which is going to probably hurt you. Plus, he has that wheelbarrow. So that's his trouble spot. That's the spot where he has got to haul tail across that so that he can get back to where he can hide in the woods if a car comes, okay? All right, so think about that while he's traveling. I'd never been on the bridge before. I'd only seen it from upriver. It was longer and higher than I thought, and I felt myself growing a little dizzy. The solid rubber tire of the wheelbarrow hummed across the asphalt and far below. So it's like when you go over a bridge in a car, it goes vroom, vroom, vroom. That's what it sounds like. I'm sorry, I'm going to read that sentence again. The solid rubber tire of the wheelbarrow hummed across the asphalt, and far below, the water swirled and passed under me. The air was much colder coming down the river, but with the panic that was rising in me, I hardly noticed. When I heard, listen to this, he's on the bridge. When I heard the car, I didn't turn around to look, so here comes a car. I pushed my legs to go even faster and felt my neck hairs rise with fear. The end of the bridge was only 30 yards away, but if it was the law, I needed time to escape into the forest with my wheelbarrow at the other side, and that just seemed impossible. I heard the car speeding up just as I came to the end of the bridge. Then my breath almost left me when I saw what I was up against. The road dropped off steeply to a swamp on both sides. There was nowhere to go. I stopped the wheelbarrow and spun around and spread my legs for balance like Pap had shown me to do when I was about to fight. I recognized the police car from pictures. It had a light on the top and badge painted on the door. It skidded to a stop in front of me, and I watched the constable as he was watching me and putting on his hat inside the car. When he stepped out, I could see he was taller and heavier than Pap. He wore his clothes tight and he moved with his chest out, and that reminded me of a flared turkey. He nodded from behind me he nodded at me from behind dark sunglasses, and then he looked over at the wheelbarrow. "What you got there, boy?" "It's living stuff." He stared at the rifle barrel sticking out from the tarp. "You doing some hunting?" I shook my head. "No, sir." "Well, what you doing with that rifle?" "Well, it's mine." "What's that on your head?" "It's a hat." "Did you make it?" "Yes, sir, out of deer skin." He walked to the wheelbarrow and lifted a corner of the tarp. He set it back down. "You that Blake boy?" I didn't answer. "You're him, ain't you?" I looked quickly at the gully behind me. I glanced down at my rifle. Now remember, he's on the end of the bridge, okay? But there's a swamp on both sides, which means it's like almost like a little pond. It's a lot of water. So can he get that wheelbarrow and just quickly ride it through the swamp? No, it's going to be muddy, and it's too heavy for him to carry. So he's trying to figure out a plan right now. It says he looks, and the gully is just where it goes down into that swamp, okay? I'm going to read that sentence again. It says, "I looked quickly at the gully behind me, and I glanced down at my rifle." "Don't you try it," he said, like he knew what I was thinking. "I'll be all over you before you know it." "I'm not doing anything to anybody." "Well, you better stop bowing up at me. Come over here and get this car." Now, right there, you can tell the attitude of the constable. Is this a nice guy? Obviously not, if he's talking to him like that. I glanced over at the rifle. Suddenly, the constable steps toward me. "Boy, you look at that rifle once again, and I'm going to knock you sideways." I swallowed hard. "Dang if you ain't the mean little cuss I thought you were." I looked at his holster. Remember what a holster is? Like where you hold a gun. I looked at his holster and the giant chrome pistol that was stuffed into it. I thought about how long it would take him to pull it out and shoot me. A second later, I spun around and leaped out into the air. I hit the ground about halfway down the slope and rolled the rest of the way to the bottom and splashed into the shallow water of the swamp. When I tried to stand, my feet punched into the soft mud, and I tripped and landed face first. Then the constable crashed up against me, and I heard him grunt. I quickly got to my knees and started to crawl, but I felt him grab my ankle and hold it as I pulled handfuls of weeds and muck. Now, we heard that word muck before. Muck is like that gooey mud. Remember, we heard it in Tangerine. It's gooey, nasty mud. Okay, so he's just pulling and pulling, trying to get away. Suddenly, I slipped free, and I scampered almost 5 feet before I heard him splat in the mud behind me and felt my ankle gripped again. "You little turd," he yelled. I looked over my shoulder and saw him lying on his stomach. His sunglasses were gone, and his face was red and twisted with frustration as he slapped at me and pulled his boots from the mud. I made a last desperate leap to get away, but I wasn't able to break his hold. I sat up and kicked his hand, and he rolled over, cursing me. Like someone doing the backstroke, he threw his free arm into the air and down into the mud and grabbed my other foot. So now both of his feet are held. I twisted and rolled like an alligator, but it did no good. He pulled me toward him in little jerks. "Don't you make me have to shoot your butt." And he sat up and pulled me into his lap. "Boy," I punched him in the face as hard as I could. "Ugh," he grunted. He stood up with me and crushed me against his chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. So he's got him like this. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, and I felt that my shoulders were about to snap. He slopped out of the swamp and walked sideways with me up the embankment, his shoes wheezing and him spitting at the ground. You know how your shoes do when they get wet? Like, that's what his shoes are doing. He kept me squeezed so tight I couldn't even think over the pain. When we got to the top of the embankment, the constable paused for a few seconds and caught his breath. Then he carried me over to the car and dropped one arm to pull the door handle. With the pressure off of me, my senses came rushing back to me, and I spun around and bit him on the chest. He yelled and pulled my head from his chest. "Juvenile center my butt. Jail's more like it. You crazy little long-haired turd." He slapped my deerskin hat from my head, and I saw it roll across the Let me read that again. He slapped my deerskin hat from my head, and I saw it roll across the road. I tried to cry out, but I felt weak and dizzy. He opened the door to the police car, and he shoved me across the back seat and slammed the door. I lay there until I caught my breath, and the dizziness went away. When I sat up, I saw the constable standing beside the car with his mud-covered arms out like a scarecrow, cussing and flapping them to fling off the mud. He kicked his legs from side to side and slung large chunks of mud and grass over the road. Then he noticed the black box clipped to his belt. He stopped and stared at it as he gently pulled it loose, and then he shook it. He walked behind the police car and he hurled it at the asphalt, where it shattered and spread across the highway in little black and silver pieces. After almost 10 minutes of pacing and cussing on the side of the road, he threw my things into the trunk. When everything else was out of the wheelbarrow, he picked it up and he tossed it over the embankment, where it arced out and stuck straight up by the handles in the swamp below. He spit after it, and then he came around and sank into the driver's seat, and then he glanced at me briefly in the rearview mirror. "I hope I busted those sunglasses good too," I said. Chapter 8. I leaned up in my seat and pressed my face against the glass as the car crossed over the bridge and picked up speed toward Gainesville. Now think about the last time he rode in a car. Think about how he felt. Come here, Butch. Think about how he felt. He's not a good car rider, is he? Sit right here, buddy. I pressed my face against the glass on the car, as the car picked up speed and sped toward Gainesville. Mr. Abrascado's store flashed past, and I stared ahead at the green traffic light, not believing that I was actually getting to see it up close. When we paused under it, I tried to look up and then spun in my seat and watched it fall behind. Then I saw a car rush past us from the other direction. I spun around again, my heart racing. Buildings came at us on each side, all of them bigger than Mr. Wellington's lodge. He's never seen anything past Mr. Abrascado's store, so now he's getting to see buildings. We sped past him, and then I sat back as we started up another bridge. There was only blue sky in front of me through the front windshield. I felt that sickness, remember? I felt that sickness creeping back into my stomach like I'd felt in Mr. Jean's car. I took a deep breath and held it, but the nausea sat in me like poison. I laid on the seat and drew my knees up and closed my eyes. It seemed like the ride would never end. Sometimes we would slow down or even come to a stop, but then we'd start moving again. The constable didn't say a word to me, and all I could hear was the road through the vinyl seat and the other cars passing us. I was able to keep from getting sick by continuing to take deep breaths and holding them. After what seemed like an hour, we finally stopped. The constable got out of the car and left his door open. I sat up slowly and looked around. We were parked in front of a brick building that said Livingston Police Department across the front. The constable came back a minute later, opened my door, and dragged me off the seat. He pulled me by the arm, and I hopped along on one foot beside him, staring at all the shiny cars in the parking lot. "What about my hat?" I said. He squeezed my arm tighter and jerked me forward. Once we were through the door, he let loose and walked out again. "Clean him up, Earl," he said over his shoulder. Earl had on a different colored uniform and was a lot younger than the constable. His hair was slicked back and as tight on him as his shirt, and his trousers. He looked at me, shook his head, and said, "Geez." I could tell he was nervous about something. He pointed me into a bathroom where they had a shower. He had me strip down and stand under the shower head with a big brush in my hand while he turned the knobs. It was the first time I'd ever taken a shower and had so much warm water over me. I just shut my eyes and hoped I could stay there for a while. Now think about that. Where else has he taken baths? I'm sure he's taken a bath before, but where do you think he would take baths when he was with his dad? He didn't have a bathroom in his shelter, right? He didn't have plumbing. He didn't have electricity. He didn't have running water. So where would they get their water? That river. Remember the river that he talks about? The Noxubee River? Or maybe some other streams? But does that water warm? Maybe they're in the summer, but not as warm as a warm shower, right? So this is the first time he's ever had like a real shower, and he's like, man, this is nice. So he just stands under that water. "Are you going to be trouble to me?" Earl said. I opened my eyes. I didn't do anything. Someone called from the next room. "You all right in there, Earl?" "Yeah, I'm all right, Bob. Is Sanders gone?" "He's gone." You'd think this was his police station, the way he comes in here and tells us what to do. Now that right there tells us who the constable is. Sanders. Sanders is the constable. Now that's the name you need to remember too, is Mr. Sanders. All right, now listen to how they talk about Sanders. Listen to how Bob and Earl talk about Sanders. They just said, "You'd think this was his police station, the way he comes in here and tells us what to do." "Well, his daddy is the judge, Earl." So Sanders' daddy is a judge, all right? "His daddy is the judge, Earl." Earl shook his head. He looked back down at me. "Start scrubbing yourself. I ain't doing it." After my shower, Earl made me put on new clothes that were too big and smelled like Mr. Aberscotto's soap shelf. I barely found those for you," he said. "I don't have anything to fit your feet. So, excuse you, Butch. So you'll just have to walk around in those socks." Now, this is not a juvenile place. Remember, when he bit Sanders, my dog's sneezing, when he bit Sanders on the chest, Sanders said, "Juvenile detention center my butt," which means I'm not taking you to the place where kids go. It's like a jail for kids. He's not taking him there. He took him to an adult jail. So would an adult jail have clothes for kids? No, kids don't go there. So the man's telling him, Earl's telling him, "This is all I've got. I know it's not going to fit you, but you're going to have to wear this, okay?" He led me back to where they locked people up, and I did my best not to trip over my pants leg and slip on the wax floor. Papa told me about jails, so I wasn't surprised when I saw the cages. Earl unlocked an empty one and motioned me inside. "You just stay quiet in here till somebody comes for you," he said. I nodded to him and locked the door, and he locked the door and walked out. Now, Earl and Bob, did they seem mean? Not really, right? I mean, they're doing their job, but they don't seem mean. Jail was the best. Now listen to that sentence. Jail was the best place I'd ever been. They had good food and a comfortable bed and a sink with running water and a flushing toilet. The only other person in a cage across the hall from me was a man who told me his name was Obregon. He said they locked him up for being too drunk and wrecking his car. He was lying on his bed, talking at the ceiling and picking scabs on his face. That's gross. "What they got you in here for?" he asked me. "I don't know." "Where you live at?" "At a hole in the ground in the forest." "You say you live in a cage?" "No, it's a shelter that trees have grown over." "I seen that story on TV. Your daddy's the one that lived out in those woods, ain't he?" "Yeah, both of us did." "What'd you eat out there?" "Lots of stuff. Stuff I trap and kill mostly. Some stuff Pap and I used to grow." Obregon grunted and laughed to himself. "By the looks of him, you sure gave Sanders a hard time." I told him I didn't want to go. He's liable to keep you in here for a while, riled up as he is. He's not one that likes to be made a fool of. Now, riled up means like mad, angry. I don't mind. I like the food here. Obregon sat up and yawned. I imagine you do. You don't look like you get much to eat. I think I could have lived here. I think I could live here for a little while. They let you go outside some? Yeah, they'll let you go out and walk around. At least they let me. They might be too scared of you. I smiled at him. I knew he was kidding me. What are they going to do with my stuff? Oh, they got it stored up front. They stripped off all my clothes. They'll keep those for you, too. I had a wheelbarrow that Sanders threw off into a swamp. I had that wheelbarrow ever since I can remember. I hauled my dad Pap around in it. You what? I loaded Pap and took him up to the cemetery in it. It's got some special meaning to you. Yeah, it's the only way I've got to get around. I never thought of a wheelbarrow meaning so much to anybody. I had a deerskin hat, too. I made it myself, but Sanders threw it away. You think they'll let me have some more pie? Obregon shouted toward the door. Hey, Earl! Earl! Earl came in through the door. What? The little fella says he wants some more pie. You got any in there? You got any in there? Earl looked at me and shook his head. One more person tells me what to do. He left the room, shut the door behind him. He came back a few seconds later with the pie and stuck it through the bars at me. This is all you get, you hear? I took the pie. You gonna let me stay in this cage tonight? Let you? I nodded. Yeah, on this bed here. Well, that's up to Mr. Sanders. He's in charge of you. Where'd he go? He went home to Gainesville. He said to keep you in here till he got back. Then what's he going to do to me? I reckon he'll haul you over to the juvenile home in Tuscaloosa. There's that word again, juvenile. Juvenile means like not an adult. It means like younger, okay? A juvenile home means like where they'll keep kids. He said I was more fit for jail. Well, I don't know. We'll just have to see. I just do what I'm told. You're spineless, Earl, Obregon said. Spineless means like you don't have a backbone, but that's not what he means. He doesn't mean like he can't stand up, like he doesn't have a real bone in his back. It means that he doesn't have any courage. Because he just said, I do whatever I'm told. He's like, you're not brave. You're spineless. Shut up, Obregon. You can tell Mr. Gene and Sanders both that I don't aim to go with them anywhere. Tell him I can whip a man 3 times my size, maybe at once. Earl shook his head. He leaned into the bars of my cage. I'm going to give you some advice, kid. You're already in a lot of trouble and don't have to be. You'll be lucky if they don't come down on you for assaulting a lawman. Assault means like attacking. So what they're saying is, he's like, you're already in a lot of trouble and you don't have to be. He's telling him, calm down. You'll be lucky if they don't come down on you for assaulting a lawman. You need to tame that temper of yours and cooperate, or you're going to end up in a lot of places you won't want to be. Let the kid be, Obregon said. Shut up, Obregon. I just want people to leave me alone, I said. Well, it doesn't work like that. You can't live by yourself until you're older, kid. It's the law. Pap said to go to Alaska, I said quietly. What? Never mind, I said. So the plan is that Sanders is going to come back. Then he's going to send him to this juvenile home for boys, which is like, it's kind of like it's not really like a jail, but it kind of is. It's for kids. And what they're saying is, even though he hasn't really committed a crime, he doesn't have anywhere to go. So it's almost kind of like an orphanage type place for him, But it's for other kids too that may have done things that were against the law. So they're staying there until he's an adult. Now, what age is an adult? 18, right? How old is he? 10. 8 years? 8 years is what they're saying. You cannot live on your own until you're an adult. So their plan is to take him from this jail. Sanders is going to take him from this jail and take him to the boys' home. Okay? So think about that. Would he want to go and be at the boys' home? Or would he want to go and be by himself in the woods? What would you want to do at this point? He doesn't know any better. And then think about the fact that he loves it in jail. All right. See y'all tomorrow.